Дамы и господа, декан экономического факультета МГУ имени Ломоносова, модератор пленарного заседания Александр Аузан.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dean of the Faculty of Economics of Lomonosov Moscow State University and moderator of the plenary session, Alexander Auzan, is invited on the stage.
Добрый день, уважаемые дамы и господа. Приветствую вас.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you at the second day of the Urban Forum in Moscow. I would like first to introduce the participants of this session, our panelists who are going to discuss the report made by the Mayor of Moscow. So this is Mikhail Abizov, Minister of the Russian Federation for Open Governance Affairs. Andres Mendoza Peña, the head of the Strategy, Marketing and Sales Practice, A.T. Kearney, and co-author of the Global Cities Index and Emerging Cities Outlook. Benjamin Barber, Walt Whitman Professor of Political Science Emeritus, and the author of a well-known book, If Mayors Rule the World. Mary Jane Cristanto Ortega, the Vice President of the Global Executive Committee of the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, Philippines. Mikhail Kuzovlev, President, Chairman of the Board of the Bank of Moscow, Chairman of the Public Chamber of Moscow. I think Mayor of our city, Sergei Sobyanin, doesn't need any introduction. So I have a few introductory remarks at first, and then I would like to give the floor to Sergei Sobyanin to present his report. Dear friends, I believe the situation we are in is not a simple one. We see that the city is changing. It's changing drastically. There are lots of disputes going on. And it's very simple to show what the changes are being made. On the one hand, we have pedestrian areas and paid parking spaces. There are lanes for bikes, for bicycles. We have new approaches for city governance. We have electronic government, and so on and so forth. At the same time, we are not happy about stock exchange news. We understand that our country and the currency of our country hit quite a bad record. This means that in the future we're facing quite tough times, and we have to look for new priorities for the city's development. I believe that three priorities are important for the city, and they should be discussed. First, we'll understand that the economic environment is changing, and there is the recession, the sluggish economic development, and this requires new approach to the city's resources, both private and governmental, private and public. Secondly, we understand that Moscow is a global city, which has not only its life, national life, but also the global life. At the same time, we don't have a very easygoing global relations because we live in a very tough time. And at the same time, we should think about preserving our bonds with other countries who maintain their connections with Moscow. Then Moscow is the city for Muscovites, and it's important to ensure feedback from our people, to ensure that the mayor of Moscow sees what people think. And it's important to take into account people's wishes and aspirations. All these issues are very important, and they should be discussed with foreign and domestic experts during this plenary session. So this concludes my introductory remarks, because as far as I understand, everyone is looking forward to the mayor's report. So, Mr. Sobyanin, the floor is yours. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today, in addition to having the second Moscow Urban Forum already, is the day of the Constitution. This is a Constitution Day, and as you know, the Constitution is the document based on which we work and have been living on. It hasn't been changed during that time. This means that it's well structured and well designed. And this design was proposed many years ago. The Constitution is the same. It doesn't change, but the space changes. The country changes. Moscow also changes. And like every living being, the city also has its stages of development. If you remember, and I'm sure you remember and you know what was going on with Moscow on the brink of 80s and 90s, 1980s, 1990s, how Moscow was developing at that time. And during the recent decade, during the recent 15 years, you could also see what's going on with Moscow. The last 4 years showed drastic changes. And in current economic conditions, the city should adopt its economic strategy. It should decide on how to implement the adopted programs and how to develop further in quite tough conditions. I believe we should try to preserve the major trends in development and the major milestones in development which were adopted several years ago. The city has no area without positive development. The new world in the Moscow development doesn't mean stagnation or stagnant development. It's not the wrap-up of programs. On the contrary, we should move from quantitative indicators to a higher qualitative level for main industries to function and for the social area to develop further in Moscow, based on the potential which has been accumulated during previous years. Much has been done during the last 4 years, and we have to do even more in the future, especially on some of the most important areas. We have to work in very tough environment when opportunities of the city's development are restricted with sanctions and quite unfavorable trend of development. Well, first we'd like to mention the real economy sector, which has changed dramatically during the last years, and it's still evolving quite rapidly, shaping the modern specialty of Moscow. First, it implies the development of high-tech production, industry, IT, and Internet. 140,000 professional programmers work in Moscow. 19 out of 20 largest Russian IT companies are based in Moscow. As for the Internet traffic, our city ranks 4th among all the cities of the world. To implement this huge potential, the city should have a high-quality infrastructure for business in the field of high technologies. And it's worth noting that we need not only the special environment, but also the urban environment. Nobody is going to work in this city if the city is not comfortable and convenient for living. Nevertheless, during 4 years, we have been working on the establishment of state-of-art technoparks where the companies can find everything they need to launch their production. There are free spaces, clean rooms, and all the accompanying services. Today, Moscow technoparks accommodated more than 360 companies with employees about 5,000. At the same time, it's not our objective to close down traditional industries which exist in Moscow and which are the pillar of its economy. We stand for making such industries more technologically advanced, environmentally friendly and modern. The concentration of high-tech businesses in these areas gradually enhances innovative environment, and this launches the process of expansion of the company and businesses. So the next world of the Moscow development and Moscow industry development should be the establishment of the full-fledged industrial parks for larger companies, industrial companies, and engineering centers of foreign, of international and domestic operations. Offices, retail, hotels. The vibrant growth of this sector makes Moscow go to a higher level, to a high qualitative level. About 8 million square meters of real estate is being built in Moscow every year. Much more like other cities, global city, maybe for the exception of China. And the construction also transforms the market. Moscow managed to get rid of eternal image of a super expensive city for tourism and business. It's possible to find grounds for every type of business at the reasonable price. Affordability of hotel services makes city attractive for Russian regions, for Russian people, and for foreign tourists. So last year Moscow hit its record, and over 5 million foreign tourists visited Moscow. In 2010, it was fewer than 4 million. The current decline of office demand, for offices, given the current conditions, could be also tackled as a positive thing. Prices for offices go down, and this will help us to get rid of speculations in the market. At the next stage of development, reasonable prices will help us to attract more companies to be based in Moscow. Due to revisited urban development policy and due to new priorities, due to the new areas in the policy, we're certain that we will continue our construction works, but at the same time, we're not going to conduct any construction between the houses. So we managed to build the new cities within cities with a population of 1.5 million people, with the jobs about 500,000. The total volume of new houses is 100 million square meters. I should say that these are not abstract plans. New Moscow is already conducting construction works, quite active construction works. 3 or 4 million square meters have been built, and we are not urging someone to start the construction work. On the contrary, we try to curb the construction in order to create first the necessary infrastructure to develop, and then to adopt the urban development or the spatial planning schemes for new Moscow, not to resemble old Moscow and residential areas. We want new Moscow have houses, transport infrastructure, social infrastructure. Everything should be in one place. Next year, new Moscow is going to have new metro stations. So we decided to stop any construction works in the historical center of Moscow. And please be reminded that we canceled the investment contracts valued $50 billion. These were the projects which could destroy the city. But at the same time, the volume of investments didn't decline. On the contrary, it grew up exponentially. At the same time, different urban development, tens of urban development decisions were made for the development of industrial areas and abandoned areas. Do you remember that several years ago we were discussing the possibility of developing industrial areas and we were going to adopt new industrial solutions? These were talks at that time, but now we all are witnessing how rapidly the construction works are going on in the area of old industrial plants and factories. There we're going to build not only houses, residential houses, there also will be facilities providing jobs, then offices, trade facilities, and social infrastructure. And let's not forget about houses. We're close to the final stage of construction of the railway road, which was built in the industrial area in the Moscow. And we're going to use this rail for passengers, these railways for passengers. We have different industrial areas which will develop quite actively after this railway is launched. For instance, there are new development projects on the area of 2 million square meters in the former premises and facilities of ZIL plant. There will be houses, new jobs, and there will be huge sport facilities with ice domes, with swimming pools, and the construction works are going to be over next year. Now we are making the proposal for organizing, for rearranging the southern part of ZIL plant territory. This includes 1 million square meters of retail, of real estate. This will be houses and social infrastructure. Then in Nagatinskaya Poima, close to ZIL plant, the playground for children and entertainment facilities will be built. In Nizhny Mnevniki, which is the area that turned into industrial area or a landfill, is going to be changed. The investors will be offered to build their special offices for our government, recreational facilities, parks, pocket parks, and so on and so forth. Finally, yesterday we drew the results of the Moscow contest on the best concept of Moscow development in the adjacent and the areas on the riverside. As you know, the Moscow riverside is about 200 kilometers long, and it's not affordable for people, it's not accessible, it's not well organized. The main idea is to replace fences, to get rid of the things which made the riverside ugly. We're going to make it looks nice. The ideas and the implementation of the ideas will take not 1 year, but it was trying. High-quality urban development solution is just one side of the successful city, and another side of the successful city is the social infrastructure, the social area. The social area should also move to the new stage of its development, a high-quality development. Let's have a look at industry and healthcare. These are the basic areas. Starting from 2010, we upgraded these industries, their material basis and financial basis. Equipment, medical equipment in outpatient clinics and hospitals was replaced. Interactive boards were installed in schools, and now we have e-governance systems, e-queues, e-case reports in hospitals and outpatients clinics. And now these institutions have new principles of financing, and they provide incentives to work with school children, with patients. We invest a lot into improving the qualification of teachers and of doctors. Such steps already improved the healthcare services and educational services. For instance, the result of scores of the state uniform exam is higher than in other regions. But we are not going to compete with other regions. We just want to reach the level of other global megacities. And now a few words about the public space of Moscow, which has also been changing dramatically. So at first, we were discussing the possibility of bringing in order parks, city parks, and getting rid of redundant advertising. But the scale of such projects is huge. Well, maybe you can think, what does it take to organize, to arrange a small pocket park in Moscow? But to change and to improve Moscow front yards before the houses, you should invest into the improvement on 20,000 of such yards. And to get rid of the redundant advertisement, we have to make amendments to our laws, and we need new administration rules. We should get rid of tens of thousands of advertising structures which are all over our cities. And each action is not just an intermediary link. This is an evolution in this sector. Today, the public space of the city doesn't look as it was decades ago. For instance, now the task is to provide comfortable conditions for pedestrians across the city. Every way starts, and usually people walk on foot. It doesn't matter whether people go to the metro station or they go somewhere else. People should feel comfortable while walking. Starting from 2015, we're going to launch a special program on comfortable pedestrian environment. And this program is called My Street. Secondly, the new public space should be filled with active life, fairs, festivals, summer cafes or open verandas. Enjoy high demand among people, and this brings about new traditions, which becomes the image of the city. Today we are going to open the new festival, which is called the trip or the voyage to Christmas. Last year, about 6 million people participated in this event, and I believe that this year will have even more people involved, and the number of people visiting us, foreign guests visiting us, is growing from year to year. So we also need to transform, to change the buildings along the pedestrian walkways. The process is already going on. As you know, that the first floors of the blocks of flats are usually occupied by restaurants, cafes, or different companies. So people have a chance to see not only the streets, but also adjacent buildings. Moscow also has milestone public spaces. We all like them and enjoy them. In the near future, VDNH will become the sports ground of the global level and exhibition ground. Then they will have a special park that will combine pedestrian walkways and recreational sites. Many European cities invested a lot into invested lots of time, decades, into the creation of public spaces. But I believe that Moscow has a chance to make a shortcut. Changes in transportation strategy of Moscow is, I believe, one of the most capital-intensive and long-term projects of the city, and one of the hardest projects of the city. So now we're trying to go away from the chaos that we faced in 2010, in 2011. Much has been done to determine the strategy. So we laid the ground, we made the foundations for this work. And one of the results of this work was the change in psychology of Muscovites. And Muscovites know that we are on the right way, and nobody doubts in the priorities of public transport development. Most people support that we need to bring in order parking spaces. And we're not going to make a turn to chaos on the roads. Citizens won't allow to do that. And the second result of the work that we conducted means the design of different projects, developed various projects, and the launch of construction works. Tens of kilometers of metro stations were commissioned, and we are constructing 100 kilometers of additional metro stations. New railways are being installed for commuter trains, and this is extremely important for us because most of cars, what we can see on Moscow roads, are from the Moscow region, from nearby regions. And now Moscow is building new bridges, viaducts, junctions, and we build every year about 80 kilometers, more than 80 kilometers. And if
So since 2015, we will get the private investors in this sector. So I'm talking about the toll road for the Kutuzovsky Prospect, and we also already identified the winner who will undertake this work. We also approved some new projects for the new hubs or transport interchanges and for the bridges over the railroad tracks. Moreover, we expect also private investors to invest in improvement of our fleet of trams, buses, and underground trains. It will allow to create in Moscow and the Moscow region a more flexible and reliable transportation system. Quite often I'm asked, and Alexander also hinted on the same thing, we have a crisis now, why do you think about the roads, re-improvements, underground and gardens, should we freeze it up and forget about it for a while? I think it would be the biggest mistake we can ever make, because the infrastructural development is the recipe from all the crises, which also allows the city to invest and to develop, because the question of improvement deals not only with the good parks and good grasses, it's a competitive space to win the people, because we are competing with the global leading cities. We should have comfortable city with a very good transportation infrastructure, which will also be a very good ground for a stable development of our big city and economy. And last but not least, because I would like to tell you about the most important project which is already generating results even today. Here, outside of this hall, you may have seen the exhibition of our projects. I'm talking about the communication between the authorities, city authorities, and the society, because most of the public services are already provided online or through the modern multifunctional centers. We did a revolution in this area because 90% of the services used to be provided in the past behind the closed doors, so the Muscovites had to spend not hours but weeks in order to get these public services. Now we have absolutely different conditions. We don't have anymore this paperwork. Now we deal with the electronic claims of our citizens online because they are submitted through our website. So we decreased by 33% the number of paper claims, and now the largest part of inquiries we get electronically. We're talking not about the form, how we get these inquiries, we're talking about the technology to process these inquiries, because when we talk about these inquiries and claims, they are not only processed, but we also take measures against 80% of the claims. And we also created, together with the Muscovites, a very interesting tool. This is the decision-making system, which is called Active Citizen. This project was started not so long ago, since the beginning of this year, and we had only thousands of people participating in this system in the beginning, but now through this Active Citizen program, 800,000 people communicate with us, so we haven't had such a dynamics in any other projects before, and I think it will be a very positive way of development in communication between the government and citizens. And the crowdsourcing projects, which are already presented here in the exhibition, also allow us to resolve very complicated city problems. But we also keep the so-called traditional communication with the public chamber, with the different public commissions. We also explain our position through the media. But these electronic services bring Moscow as a big city to the leading positions among the large cities in the world. Dear colleagues, Moscow is not a calm base city. Certainly, the negative trends influencing the Russian economy can have also a negative effect on Moscow. For example, we have an increase in loan price, and the growth of inflation is also quite negative for Muscovites as well as for the Russians. But I don't really think that the current negative trends are able to change or slow down the Moscow development, because the city has enough resources to continue the implementation of development programs. Our main asset is the target-oriented Muscovites who proved many times not to lose hope even in a very difficult time. So we will still have the construction cranes, we will open the new road junctions, we will commission new underground trains, trams and buses, and we will also implement new cultural and creative projects. And it will improve the everyday life of all of us, and will also give hope and assure people that the city is moving to the right direction. Thank you. And I believe in Moscow and Muscovites. Thank you. Sergey, one more minute. I would like to clarify one more question. If it is more comfortable for you to answer this question, to be being seated. If I understood you correct, I would like to go back to the main problem when you have to implement the priorities of the Moscow development in the poor economic situation. I already heard what you said, that the investments into the construction infrastructure is a very good anti-crisis multiplicator. And you also said that the recession and the crisis decreased the price for the office rent, for example. do I understand you right that your idea and the Moscow government's idea is that we can use the negative recession trends as an Aikido principle? We can turn them into a driver which can support the city development priorities, but not as a correction for these priorities. I don't go in for Aikido, but what you said, that's absolutely right, because the shortage of resources led us to save money and to invest efficiently, because during the last 6 months we decreased by 25% the cost of the main Moscow construction sites. We also introduced the price monitoring and control system and carry out auctions. So the shortage of our Moscow budget is fully covered through the saving via the so-called city order. On the other hand, we may have an opportunity, and we're absolutely sure that we need to develop the city infrastructure. It also attracts the private investments and private capital, and it also helps the city economy not to fall into the traps which occur due to the crises and downturns in economy. We shouldn't stagger in our development, because we already chose our strategy and we should go this way. And when the times are hard and tough, we should keep moving forward and should concentrate ourselves. We should really join together the city and the citizens and go forward. Thank you, Sergey. We can agree that when the government of Moscow is sure in its targets, it's also something what can also eliminate the negative trends of the crisis. Now we start discuss the Moscow development priorities in terms of global views, in terms how the communication with the citizens functions. And now I'd like to give the floor first to Minister Mikhail Abizov, because Mikhail, you said in your presentation that Moscow faced revolutionary changes in the area of open government, because this is the area you are responsible for as a minister of the Russian government, but this is the area where you are the leader and a motor, and I know it due to our meetings within the Commission on Administrative Reforms. Mikhail, the history scientists say that the revolution takes place in the capital and other cities may face only strikes. So, if you have any changes in Moscow, it should also affect the whole country. If you have this electronic revolution in Moscow, and what kind of effect it will have for the whole Russia. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you, Sergey, for a brilliant presentation. If I answer the question, what are the priorities for the Moscow development in the current economic conditions? Probably we need to answer the question of what is the most competitive advantage for Moscow right now, how Moscow differs from other Russian regions, and what is going to be the driver for the Moscow development in the nearest future. I think that Mr. Sobyanin and his team identified absolutely right that the main driver for the Moscow development will be human capital, because the human capital is the fundamental for the long-term city development. It is not only words for Moscow, it is real actions which are already implemented in a large-scale Moscow program in order to involve the citizens into the city governance. The Moscow created the needed information infrastructure. We got our city portal, active citizen program, and so on. When we discussed with Sergei Sobyanin how to start this project, we thought we could involve people, by approximately 20% of people to this service in a year, because we started with 5 or 10,000 users. And now this active citizen portal is used by more than 800,000 unique users, and we already carried out more than 250 discussions on the basis of this website, and more than 55 discussions were for the whole city. And it is quite important that people taking part in this project can see how the government can take decisions based on the public discussion, so the people can get involved into other projects offered by the city government. So this resource is very unique, and we discussed it not so long ago at a meeting headed by Dmitry Medvedev. For example, there was the electronic poll in Moscow, and within this electronic poll in Moscow you can get acquainted with almost with all the facilities which can be interesting for people and businesses in Moscow. These are social, cultural facilities, transportation facilities, and the public service facilities. So many services are already proposed for citizens and businesses, and they increase the quality of life significantly for Muscovites, because they deprive people of unneeded activities, they deprive the government of unneeded bureaucratical procedures, and they make the authorities closer and available for common people. Here Moscow is a leader, an example for other regions. If you say that a revolution or evolution starts in Moscow and continues in regions, we have to say that we start in Moscow a training program for our colleagues from other Russian regions, because in Moscow there is a University of State Governance which is supervised by the Moscow government, and we train thousands of colleagues. I'm talking about thousands of officials from other Russian regions, and they get familiar with how these electronic services function in Moscow, and they can introduce them in their regions. But we keep working hard, and we carry out also workshops in other Russian regions, and I have to tell you that Moscow is taking over the best practices from other Russian regions, and there are directions where the other regions have something to show, and I can see how Moscow is adopting these best practices, because the pace is really fast. Also, Moscow decides really fast, because you're talking about the crisis in economy, so we have to expect really hard times in the economy, but I'm absolutely sure that most efficient dealing with this risk will be in those areas where the people can decide fast, and Moscow is a good example here. Certainly the electronic services can increase the quality of the authorities, and the quality communication between the authorities and people is also very important. Certainly Moscow changed significantly, because we have a lot of formal and informal discussions with Sergei Semyonin, because I'm running a lot in Moscow every week. I'm really running in Moscow. Probably I can run 20 to 30 kilometers in a week. So you are testing the pedestrian areas in Moscow. I can call Sergei Semyonin or Mr. Kapkov, and I can also say what kind of garden or kind of public garden or pedestrian area were organized. Even 5 or 6 years ago, I was dreaming of having or making sports in Moscow, because I was looking at these large parks in Moscow which were just black holes, and I didn't really understand why such a rich, big city was not able to find money to make this space capital for people, because if we come to other Western capitals and see a lot of people going in for sport in the streets, and the mood is absolutely different because these people incorporate an absolutely different culture. And I wasn't able to understand why it was not possible in Moscow. And these changes are happening in front of us, and I think it's a very good cultural revolution, and I think this is something what can help us to cope with the crises and risks, and Moscow will overcome these obstacles, because Moscow is not only a test field, but is a very good example for other regions. The federal government holds it for very important, because when we plan our initiatives, we discuss this initiative drafts with Moscow first in order to get the feedback very fast, what can work, what cannot work, in order to make additional decisions, because Moscow is a very large site with very good feedback in order to improve the quality of the federal government decisions. We also make mistakes and we need to correct some things. And in this connection, I would like to thank Sergei Sobyanin for this support. It's really simple things, because within the open government system, I have to carry out the price audit of the large investment projects in Russia. Normally I get familiar with the project documentation, look at the costs and prices for the infrastructural construction, and sometimes I'm not sure whether this or that cost was right. And normally I go to Sergei Sobyanin and ask about the price for the metal structure for the bridges, and he said 85,000 rubles. And this is a direct communication, and I transfer this information to my colleagues and ask my colleagues to explain why we have the 220,000 rubles per ton. And if you are not able to purchase or procure at a good price, please go and get trained. So without this support, it's not possible to govern and manage efficiently. So I always put Moscow as an example to my colleagues, to also in other Russian regions. And I would like to repeat what I said in the beginning, because the current Moscow policy in the area of industry, in high-tech, in the social area, in the infrastructural area, is concentrated around people, around Muscovites. Even unpopular, complicated decisions are made based on the philosophy what this decision can give Muscovites, because I'm a Muscovite and I can thank Sergei Sobyanin for a comfortable quality of life. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mikhail. Dear friends, we all understood that the open government system has a spare block which is linked to the feedback when the federal minister runs in Moscow. Do you bicycle? This no. And can call the mayor and a minister of culture and ask them what is happening in the city and informs them about what is happening in the city. It is very nice to hear that Mikhail really accepts what is happening in the city life. I would like to add one more thing. I don't want to abuse the time limit given. Currently, we are implementing a large project. One of the project leaders is Sergei Sobyanin. This is actually the so-called oversight functions. This is what Russian president mentioned in the last statement to the parliament. Because if you talk about the oversight, this is something what deals with businesses and common people, and Moscow proposed this single state oversight for the neighboring functions when all these inspections were united into one authority. So we got a kind of one door system, what simplified the whole process. To 2015, we started pilot projects when we can transfer this control and oversight duties from the federal level to the regional level, and now we discuss with the Moscow government what kind of control and monitoring duties can be given from the federal government to Moscow in order to administrate. And I think it would be an additional driver for Moscow for the next year. As for the control and oversight, have to look how the time limit is fulfilled. So I would like to ask colleagues to be within the time limit, because this session is a large one, but we have to finish it on time. Otherwise, because we have a lot of busy people here. What Mikhail said at the end of his speech, I'm talking not about the control and oversight, I'm talking about the human capital. This is the indicator in which Moscow improved its position in the ranking. And Mikhail also mentioned the culture, because Moscow also improved its cultural indicator, but there are other indicators where our position went down. For example, the information exchange and the business activity. That's why I would like to invite Andres Mendoza Peña to our discussion, because Mr. Peña is one of the author and co-organizer of the Global City Ranking, Global Cities Index, and it is quite interesting to listen to Mr. Peña how the priorities mentioned by the mayor may affect the Moscow positioning in the Global Cities Index. What is your forecast? What is going to happen in the next year in this Global Cities Index for Moscow? You are welcome, Mr. Peña.
So first of all, I want to highlight something very relevant about rankings, which is that they should be used as a reference, as a guidance, and should not be the main purpose to define the policy for the city. And I believe that the plan that Mr. Sabanyan outlined is exactly focused on the right priorities, because it's focused on involving the citizens in governance, is thinking about the holistic well-being of Muscovites. So I really appreciate the way in which the mayor is thinking about moving Moscow forward. Now, in regards of how the priorities outlined by Mr. Sabanyan are likely to impact on the Moscow positioning in the global rankings, I believe that there are very interesting elements of the plan, particularly around the areas of business activity and human capital. I also want to acknowledge the question around information exchange, but let me start by highlighting the areas of strength that I see in the plan outlined. So first of all, Mr. Sabanyan talked about the investment in education and healthcare, and those are two critical components in the rankings, particularly when thinking about the competition for talent is not between other Russian cities, but as rightly mentioned, is a global competition for talent. So making investment in education that will attract global talent is a critical success factors for cities in the future, and I think that was very rightly highlighted. Second, on business activity, it's very clear that Moscow is thinking in the short and the long term. In the short term, because there were very clear actions that were highlighted for what was described as a typical or traditional industries, trying to develop industrial parks to attract companies, foreign companies to be present in Moscow. But most importantly, I believe what is to me the highlight of the plan outlined today is the focus on high-tech, the high-tech industries. Today we are facing a digital revolution, similar to the industrial revolution we faced in the past. And the digital revolution is impacting and will be impacting businesses, industries, and cities. And I believe that those cities that proactively start today thinking and acting on plans to address some of the challenges and capturing those opportunities are the ones that are going to be successful in the future. And I believe that one way that this can be put into practice is by making investment in the high-tech space and working closely with private-public partnerships involving the local universities and the private sector to foster entrepreneurship that will drive new business that is going to foster not only the development of the Moscow economy, but it's going to have very positive consequences for the entire Russian economy. Then, in regard to your comment about information exchange, there are things that cities can control, and there are things that are beyond the scope of the responsibilities of the city. And one of the areas that are tracked in the city's ranking about information exchange is the degree of openness for information exchange. And to be frank, censorship is one of the areas in which Moscow and other cities from China, like Beijing, Shanghai, are impacting negatively. However, there are other elements that are tracked in information exchange, like the broadband capacity for internet availability and flow, and that's an area where Moscow is doing very well and appears to be an area of focus for the government of Moscow. So I think that in the areas where Moscow have a scope of responsibility and can act upon are being highlighted as priorities going forward. So I believe that overall Moscow should move forward in the ranking in the future.
Спасибо. Спасибо.
Thank you. Probably we got a very clear expert opinion for the problems in a further movement and how the Moscow can be positioned globally. And now, if you allow me, I can also bridge to the next expert, to the Professor Barber, because Professor Barber wrote the book If Mayors Rule the World, with an idea that the national countries have become not so important and the mayor may rule the world even better than the national governments. I don't think we need to discuss it, because currently we're talking in Russia about the strengthening our national country, because we had quite a long imperial history. Currently we are strengthening our country. And I would like to ask the following question. Professor Barber initiated the Mayors Parliament. This is the global association of mayors of the world and the mayors of New York and Warsaw members. And as far as I know, that Professor Barber is trying to persuade Mr. Sobyanin to participate in this association of global cities. Professor Barber, please tell us, why do we need this Mayors Parliament and why Moscow should participate in this parliament?
Thank you very much for that. Tomorrow I will have an opportunity to speak at greater length about the Mayors Parliament, so I won't do too much now. And in fact, what I'd like to do is answer your question by commenting on what the mayor just said, because the way in which he spoke says something about why mayors, rather than prime ministers and presidents, have a global role to play in governance. But let me back up for a minute and just tell you that I was first in Moscow 40 years ago, 1975. And of course, under the leadership of Mayor Sobyanin and with all the changes, much has changed. But in another way, Moskva is still Moskva. And it was the same way in the 1940s when the Germans were at the door and held off. And it was the same way in the time of Napoleon, when Napoleon was at the door but did not get in. Moscow is older than the Russian Federation, it's older than the Soviet Union, and it is older than the czars. It has been here for a long time. Boston is older than the United States. London is older than England. Most of the world's cities, whether you talk about Cairo or Damascus or Beijing, are much older than the countries and the political regimes that are currently in place. And there's a good reason for that, and I hear it when I listen to Mayor Sobyanin talk about the challenges today for development in Moscow. And he sounds very much like Mayor de Blasio in New York, who talks about the challenges of development in New York. And Mayor de Blasio sounds like Anne Hidalgo, the new female mayor of Paris, who talks about the challenges of Paris. And the fact is, he speaks a different language than prime ministers or presidents do. And let me say, the language that mayors use, and the mayor's language here today, let me use a word, but don't be angry, it's very boring. It's a boring language. The mayor insists on talking about jobs. How boring. Pedestrian zones. How boring. Schools and economic development. How boring. I watched television last night when I arrived. I listened to RT, I listened to CNN, I listened to Deutsche Welle, and nobody was talking about jobs, nobody was talking about pedestrian zones. They were talking about war. They were talking about the competition in the South China Sea between the United States and China. They were talking about Ukraine. They were talking about Gazprom. They were talking about the collapsing ruble. They were talking about the racial problems in my country. They were talking about war and peace, the way Tolstoy was many years ago. But the mayor doesn't talk about those issues. He talks about the things that affect us every day: schools, jobs, transportation, infrastructure, making a livable city, making a clean city. That's the language of mayors. Mayors are not ideologues, they're problem solvers. They're pragmatists. They look at the city and say, how can I make it better for, and the mayor said this, he said, the citizens, Muscovites, New Yorkers, Parisians. President Xi and President Obama can have an argument about global power. But the mayor of Shanghai, the mayor of Moscow, the mayor of Vienna, the mayor of Bogota, and Mr. Mokas, the former mayor of Bogota, is here with us in this meeting. They have to have a much more boring subject. They have to care about how people live from day to day. Are they healthy? Are there decent hospitals? Are there schools? Is there a pedestrian zone? Is it a place people want to live? Well, let me tell you, I will take boring over exciting every day of the year. Because what is boring? Making a city work is the essence of government, is the essence of citizenship, is the essence of democracy. Our cities are different than our states and our nations, where the big quarrels play out. You can have a conflict between Russia and Germany, Russia and the United States, but Moscow and Los Angeles can cooperate. Smolensk and Lyon, the mayors can talk together about common problems because they face a common set of challenges, and that is the real meaning of politics. I believe we live in a distorted world, a world where we think politics is about what gas companies do. Politics is about nationalism. Politics is about war and peace. No. Politics is about achieving an infrastructure, an education, a health system, a security system, a transportation system that allows people to live their lives. The nation state is the great level of what we call political power. But the issues we care about happen in our cities. When I meet friends from around the world, I say, "Where are you from?" And they might say Russia or France. But usually, they say St. Petersburg, Helsinki, Berlin. They talk about the cities because cities are not just a level of government. Cities are the essential human communities where we're born, where we grow up, where we're educated, we get married, we have children, we have jobs, we pray, we play, we create, we get old, and we die. When people die, you don't see, "He died in Russia today." No, he died in St. Petersburg today. They identify with the communities. He died in New York. She died in Chicago. Because those are the communities that define us, and we relate to cities in a different way than we relate to the nation. Because it's the place where things have to work. In my country, the United States, you know, last year, twice, the government of the United States closed its doors. It closed. Twice. Nobody noticed. But close Moscow, close New York City, close Paris. You can't do that. You must be frustrated, Mr. Mayor, sometimes with the problems here, but you can never say to your people, "I'm closing Moscow this week. I'm fed up. We'll be closed for a week." No police, no fire department, no hospitals, no jobs. We're closed. You cannot close cities. So I want to point out that the language of the mayor, the language of the city, is the true language of politics. It's the language of community. It's the language that allows us to live our lives. And that's why mayors, unlike prime ministers and presidents, have to be pragmatists. They have to get the job done. It doesn't matter whether you're a socialist or a capitalist or a conservative. You have to make the city work. And what I admire so much, Mr. Mayor, in your comments is, excuse the expression, how boring it
Thank
is.
you.
In the very good sense. Boring because it was about all the
Thank you,
things
Professor.
that matter to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It seems to me, Professor, you are more poet than scientist, not just scientist. Уважаемые
Dear friends, so we heard something like a sonnet, like a poem about cities, about language. But it seems to me that it's truly important topic. I think that Professor Barber started to save some arguments for his personal meeting with the mayor, and where he will explain him why Moscow should be involved in the global mayor's parliament. But I have a question to Maria Jane Crisando Ortega. Well, let's come back to the language. Well, mayors very often think about roads repair, what's going on with the taxes, what about income tax, or whether it's time to reinstall communication or utilities. But as far as I understand, you are involved in sustainable development, and you used to be a mayor and you worked with the cities. Could you tell me the things which our mayor said, are they in line with the ideas and the standards of sustainable development? Is this in line with the global trend of sustainable development? Those priorities which Moscow has in the report, are they in line? So the floor is yours.
Mr. Alexander, first of all, I would like to thank Mayor Sobyanin for inviting me here for this Moscow Urban Forum. As Alexander said, I was a 24/7 mayor, but only of a very small city. And I'm not here to really say and comment on a big city like Moscow and on what Mayor Sobyanin mentioned. However, I also have another hat, and this was when I was Secretary General of CityNet. In 1987, UNESCO and UN Habitat already saw that urbanization will set in this world. And so they said, we have to empower, we have to capacitate all the mayors because they are the 24/7 workers in an urbanized world. And so we had networking in the Asia-Pacific context. To just mention Professor Barber's comment, I would just like to share with you one experience, one incident that happened in CityNet. Only last year, Yokohama, that was hosting CityNet for 25 years, had to give it up for Seoul, who bid to host it. While the president of Korea was attacking the prime minister of Japan for something that happened years ago during World War II, in CityNet during our General Assembly meeting, the mayor of Yokohama nominated the mayor of Seoul to be president of CityNet, and in turn, the mayor of Seoul, Mayor Park Won-sun, nominated Yokohama as honorary president of CityNet. Isn't that beautiful? While all those in the national level were attacking each other, friendship and peace was happening between cities. Also, I am now Vice President of ICLEI, the International Council of Local Environmental Initiatives. And while listening to Mayor Sobyanin earlier, I noticed he talked about being a sustainable city. What is a sustainable city? He wants to live a city that would be there for the next generation. He wants to help Muscovites have a healthy, happy life. He wants to come up with a green urban economy, a resilient city, a resource-efficient city, a low-carbon city, and he wants to have it a biodiverse city. And I would just like to say, I commented earlier before this, I thank Mayor Sobyanin, because when I came to Russia, you see, I studied Russian 40 years ago. I've been wanting to come and visit Moscow and St. Petersburg, but it's the first time I've been here. And when I arrived, I saw the beautiful lights of the Red Square. I saw the blue and the white and the gold against the Red Square. And I said, the mayor must really want his Muscovites to be healthy and happy, especially during this holiday season. And I would like to thank you. As a tourist, my spirit really soared because I saw that Russia could be a very attractive tourist destination. I also heard from Mayor Sobyanin that he wants to leapfrog, to be all of this, to be like all the 1,212 cities who are members of ICLEI. And most especially, I'm also a member of the reference committee of the public places, the future of places, where we put the pedestrians ahead of everybody else. That the pedestrian is number one. The road is only there to bring the people from one place to the other, and that we should encourage biking and running. And I would like to thank Mikhail for running and noticing where can we make this a more beautiful place, and where can we have a park for children to enjoy. And it is not gated, it does not keep people out, it is inclusive so that anybody who wants to come and have sports, recreation, or just sit down and enjoy the beauty of Moscow can do so. So thank you very much, Mayor Sobyanin, because I have seen that you are on the road to coming up with a sustainable city for Moscow, for the Muscovites. Congratulations.
Спасибо, госпожа Ортега.
Thank you, Mrs. Ortega. It's nice to hear global gratitude, global thanks, so to speak. And I see the words of thanks not only from Muscovites, from us living in Moscow, but also from foreign experts. But let's come back to priorities and to the challenges of our city.
I would like to be thankful that I have represented the women in this panel. As you can see, you have also heard the voice of women. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Итак,
Before giving the floor to Mr. Kuzovlev, I would like to remind you that Mayor in his report said that Moscow and the National Specialty and Labor Division is based and is focused on high technologies. So we have, I would like to ask Mikhail Valerievich speak about that. But I want you also to mention the attraction of private investments. I understand that given recessions it's quite hard to do, but on the other hand, the mayor hopes that investments into infrastructure should be composed also of private investors and of private investments. You working in the Bank of Moscow, I believe, can comment on that. So, Mikhail will speak about the smart city. And I hope that we will also make his comments. Well, in fact, this is not the presentation, it's not the report, just a few slides. Undoubtedly, urbanization process gives an impetus, and in the largest cities of the world, most of our population live. We have 12 million Muscovites and 8 million people coming to work here. Very often, it's hard to solve problems in one apartment, in one flat, but when we speak about a huge city, it's even harder. When Sergei said that 140,000 programmers work in Moscow and 100 companies, IT companies work here, I think it's a prerequisite for the next step. We have the program, it is a strategy, which is called Smart City. And the smart city that will make possible to work in Moscow successfully. In order to organize a good life in a mega city, we need to create smart services that will make not only the city smart, but they will help the companies to work. So we have a city bank. This is an urban bank that works in Moscow, and we provide services for municipalities. And we also work with VTB branches. Our work is very efficient. We finance the smart infrastructure, utilities infrastructure creation. The city should know how much it spends, how much resources it consumes, and people should know and understand what they are paying for which services they are paying for, since housing and utilities payments are quite a significant part of our payments. We have a single payment document where it's possible to pay simultaneously to 30 providers, service providers. So we have just one. You have go to the bank or just click on your mobile phone and make the payment. In parallel, we also develop a transport system, a smart transport system, including metro stations. We should understand, we should try to make it convenient for people to go to metro, to use metro services without making any additional movements and without wasting our time. We have also different city services. We have the portal of city services. We are acquirers of this portal. Together with the Department of City Information, the city is always providing different types of opportunities for making different products for business communities. So this is the part of the smart city. Moscow is a very social city, and it does a lot for Muscovites to be able to use modern technologies to socialize in the city. We have, for instance, the social card of a Muscovite, which helps people to obtain different services. I would also like to mention the evolution. All smart products in cities were expressed in different city cards. I know the same practice was in Seoul, which was provided by the Association of Bus Transporters or Bus Providers. But Moscow decided to go further, decided to take more advanced steps. We have a social card of a Muscovite. It's a very convenient card which allows Muscovites to use a set of different social services. And these are not only informational services, it's also possible to make payments. It's possible to have the appointment to the doctor. We are always developing this product. This allows us to make the city environment, the urban environment, convenient for people. And new electronic products can appear easily in the market. For instance, we provide mobile applications not only for bank services providing, but based on our products, we can render the services that can be used by Muscovites and the guests of Moscow, who are the clients of other financial institutions. For instance, we designed the mobile application using which you can pay for more than 200 services, and you can use the cards, bank cards of different Russian banks. And you can use even international cards for making payments. So you see different products that we provide. And recently we were awarded for our project, which is called apartment payment. Or, for instance, you can use your gadget and make a picture using your gadget, and then automatically, using the barcode, the payment will be automatically made. Then if you know that people are getting older and there is the aging problems in the city. Therefore, we need to balance the interests of those people who live here, who are elderly, and those who are young, who come to Moscow. The mayor mentioned the project, which is called Active Citizen. Millions of people are now communicating using state-of-the-art technologies, mobile technologies. Moscow is a leader, or one of the leaders. Much has to be done in the future, but at least we have laid the foundations. We've mentioned the social responsibility of business. For instance, for the Bank of Moscow, oh, by the way, you know about the system of bicycle rent. At first, it was a part of the social or advertising budget, but then we understood that this idea is quite interesting for city. There are problems with traffic congestions in Moscow, and not only in Moscow, in other cities, in large mega cities. There are the same problems of traffic congestion. And problems will always be in large cities. It doesn't matter how smart we are or how many roads we have. Still, we should try to use new ways of transportation. My colleague said that the pedestrian is the main one. The pedestrian should have a chance to walk and to use the bicycle. In order to use all such services, he or she should be able to make easy payments, to effect the payments quite easily, to pay for parking, for bicycle riding, or whatever. And when our businesses provide such services, please have a look at the slide with maps. Do you see these blue dots? By the way, at first we're not going to make this application, but then, because every bicycle is equipped with a special monitoring device to prevent its theft. But we can see the most interesting routes for the bike riders. And here on the map you could see the lane for bike riders. And by the way, those lanes contribute to the increase in retail sales. If you have a look at blogs, what bloggers write about restaurants businesses, you could see that restaurants are now desperate to have lanes of such lanes passing by their restaurant, passing in the vicinity of their restaurants, because this increases the number of people attending the restaurant. We discussed here at the Global Mayors Parliament. Well, you know, mayors have a very peaceful work. They have their tasks, they have their problems, but for them it's important to ensure the peaceful development of the city and the comfortable development of the city in any case. But the city is always dependent on the federal authorities. The most important is to ensure the dialogue between business and authorities, between people and the city. We have such a dialogue in Moscow. Very often we bring to the people's attention different issues. Recently we discussed at the public chamber the issue of taxes, of trade fees.
So we have to charge this trade fee from a square meter. Normally the businessmen prefer to pay this so-called sales tax, but if the city decided to adopt this law, it could be a problem, because the city announces quite a lot of conditions for businesses in terms of this trade fee. But when we were talking about the opportunities for investments in Moscow, I would like to support the mayor. They're talking not about the investments in the toll roads. For example, talking about investments into the utility payment system. When this system is transparent, it gives banks an opportunity to assess the financial model of every small enterprise. We decided to upgrade the boiler house, for example, because in other regions, any management companies can also misuse the collected money. In Moscow, it is not possible, and it is only possible when we have the smart city concept. And I think that Moscow is very comfortable to do business. If we have problems, and everyone can have problems, but they need to be resolved, and they are resolved in Moscow. Thank you, Mikhail. You can also see how many colors we hear. If we were listening to Professor Barber, it was a kind of poem about maize. When we were listening to the banker Kuzovlev, we can also listen to the chairman of the Russian Public Chamber, who can also tell us how this communication feedback function. Now probably this is the end of our session. I would like to give the final floor to you, Mr. Sobyanin. Professor Barber gave us a very good idea to close the city, but we are not so extreme. But I've got another idea to close something for a while in order to understand how worth it is. Because, for example, we're really not able to hesitate. There's no real chance again we put on the roads in winter because we can save a lot of money. And I will propose to not to use these chemicals in winter for a week. It would be a really funny story because it can generate an awful collapse in the city, but afterwards we will feel that these chemicals are really crucial for the Moscow roads in winter. We haven't gotten far away from it, but probably we don't really remember, and we can close the toll parkings in Moscow for a week. And in this case, you don't really need to come to the city center by car because you can reach it by car, but you won't be able to leave the city center by your own vehicle. And the Professor Barber said in his poem that the mayors are not really interesting guys, quite boring. But I say I don't feel bored every day because every day is not peace and war, it's pure war. These are challenges we have to deal with. And in reality, it is probably one of the most complicated but also at the same time the most interesting jobs in the world, because it means a very simple movement. You have to feel the citizens' demand for something. You need to plan these changes and to get a feedback. And if this feedback is positive, you think that you live this day, this year, and this life not for free. And a colleague said absolutely right that the main advantage of our cities is the human capital. And when yesterday we were discussing with colleagues what the growth and the development of mega cities is, we were talking about the fact that the growth is just a city scaling or a problem scaling, and the development is not the amount of concrete or the number of floors or the number of roads. This is the development of human capital, which means comfortable life in the city, good utilities, good education, good healthcare, and quality of life, because it means the quality of life for people. And I think that the sustainable city development, we were talking today, Ms. Ortega was talking about it, the sustainable development is, in fact, that the people should be aware and sure of tomorrow. And this is the most important thing. And the colleagues ask quite often, and they also can be quite critical that the city does everything too fast. Let's stop, let's think, let's calculate. And in this case, I can agree with Mrs. Ortega that everything what we want to improve will be not for you, not for those who are here in the hall, but not for those who are living in the city today. It will be for the future generations, but we won't live in this future. That's why we hurry up in order to provide a comfortable city for you. Thank you, Sergey. Dear friends, I would like to use my moderator's right and say a couple of final words. I'm an economist and I always think what kind of resource and conditions can be used to implement all these ideas. But the economists think not only about the money and resources, because Mikhail Bulgakov said that not the toilets but the mines destroy the life. And next year we will open a master program at the Lomonosov University, which will be called Cognitive Economy, because how the people think and behave in an economy. Why it is important? Because I think we need to understand how the board problems of a city are linked to the people's needs. We discussed the priorities. What did it show? It is quite important to understand how these priorities are linked. The mayor said we are a city of IT and high tech. Please, where did you see where we got the evolution of this feedback in the communication and also in the electronic services? Because the city used its economic specialization in order to find its own model, in order to change the relationships with citizens. The mayor said any route started by walking and ended up by walking, and Mrs. Ortega said that a pedestrian was the most important citizen of a city. But we're talking not about pedestrians, we're talking about the quality of life, which should meet the human capital requirements. In terms of human capital, ranking is really high because Moscow generates really smart people, not only for itself but also for Russia and the whole world. And it is quite important how we keep these talented people during the recession. When I was meeting Dmitry Medvedev, we talked in spring, and certainly we were expecting a recession. Certainly we have to spend money for multiplicators for the in order to smooth the recession, but the next decade will be the years when the competition for the human capital will be very important. That's why we need to not to lose the human capital, otherwise we will overcome the current crisis, but we won't be able to join the post-crisis world. And I think that the city government understands it, and I hope the Russian government understands it too, how difficult it is to combine the increase of cost due to the crisis and to maintain the human capital development. But it is very important. We are working in the global networks, in the global world. We are invited, we are called to join these global networks. Now the current world is complicated, and this world, Moscow, is very important and remarkable. So the city really finds its ways not only in the global assessments but also in the global positioning, because it carries out a lot of exchanges, information exchanges, for example. For example, the Sigma economist used to say, I would apologize, we can do everything, but we cannot do everything. That's why we need the priorities, because we cannot do everything. We need to identify what we can do right now. Moscow, but Moscow can do everything and has all opportunities for it. Let's wish success to the Moscow mayor and all the panelists and to all